My name is Eleanor Parker. I'm 76 years old, a retired nurse who spent 40 years tending to the sick in our small town of Brooksville. My late husband, Richard, built this house with his own hands back when we were young and full of dreams. I raised my 2 children here. I cooked Sunday dinners in this kitchen, sang lullabies in the very rooms where their laughter still seemed to echo, and I thought, foolishly as it turns out, that family meant safety. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened last week. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon. The kind of day when the sky looked bruised, and the whole world seemed weighed down by gray clouds. I had just taken cookies out of the oven, chocolate chip, the same ones my grandkids loved, when my daughter-in-law, Madison, came into my living room holding her phone in one hand like it was a weapon. She looked at me with that tight smile she always wore when she was angry but wanted to appear polite. "Eleanor," she said in a voice as cold as the rain outside, "I think it's time you stopped touching my kids so much." I thought I hadn't heard her right. I stood there, holding the tray of cookies, the warmth seeping through the old mitts I'd had for years. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice shaking. "My kids," she repeated, her tone sharper this time. "You hug them, you kiss them, you pick them up without asking. Needs to stop. They're my children. Not yours." I felt the room tilt. My own son, David, was standing behind her, silent, his hands in his pockets, not defending me, not saying a word. And the worst part, she was saying this to me in my own home. The same home where she'd been living rent-free for the past 2 years after losing her job. The same home where my husband and I had built every memory brick by brick. The same home where I had rocked those grandbabies to sleep so many nights, whispering prayers over them when fevers kept them awake. Now she was looking at me like I was some intruder, like I was a stranger to my own flesh and blood. I put the tray of cookies down on the table because my hands had started to tremble. Madison crossed her arms. "I'm serious, Eleanor. It makes me uncomfortable. From now on, keep your hands to yourself. They're my kids. My kids." The words rang in my ears like a slap. And just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, she said something that nearly brought me to my knees. Something so cruel, so cutting, that it changed everything. But before I tell you what it was, you need to understand how we got here. Because this didn't start in my living room on that rainy Thursday. No. This story began long before Madison ever raised her voice to me. And it ends in a way none of them, David, Madison, or anyone else, ever saw coming. Not in a million years. Before Madison ever walked into our lives with her sharp words and cold stares, things were different. My name is Eleanor Parker, and for most of my 76 years, I believed family was everything. I believed love and loyalty went hand in hand, and that sacrifices meant something. I grew up with nothing but dreams and a strong back. My husband Richard and I built this house when we were just 23. He worked construction, I worked night shifts at the hospital, and together we raised David and his sister Emily. David was my firstborn. I carried him through long winter nights when the wind used to slip through the old walls. I still remember the way he used to curl his tiny fingers around mine when he was a baby, like he was holding on for dear life. Everything I did, every tired morning after a double shift, every penny we saved, was for those kids. But life has a funny way of turning love into something complicated. Madison came into David's life 10 years ago. First, I was happy for him. She was pretty, smart, well-spoken, and carried herself like someone who had big plans. But even in those early days, something about her eyes felt calculating. Like she was always taking stock of people, figuring out where she stood and what she could gain. The first time she came to our house, she looked around like she was appraising it. I brushed it off back then, telling myself I was overthinking things. After all, David loved her. That had to mean something, right? But then the small things started. One Thanksgiving, before they even got married, she came into my kitchen while I was cooking. She glanced at the turkey I was basting and said, "Oh, you still cook everything with so much butter? That's old-fashioned." Old-fashioned. The word stung, but I smiled anyway, because that's what mothers do when they want peace for their sons. Over time, her comments grew bolder. Little digs about the house, about my cooking, about the way I dressed. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself she was young, and young people say things without thinking. But it wasn't just words. After she married David, they hit some hard times. Madison lost her job, David's hours were cut, and suddenly they couldn't keep up with rent. So what did I do? Open my doors. This is your home, I told them. Stay as long as you need. And they did. Months turned into a year. A year turned into 2. Paid the bills. I cooked the meals. I babysat the kids so they could go out and get some fresh air on weekends. I gave and gave and gave, thinking one day they'd stand on their feet again and maybe, just maybe, remember who had been there for them. But people don't always remember kindness the way you hope they will. Sometimes they start to think they're entitled to it. The first real crack came one afternoon when I was folding laundry in the living room. Madison walked in, saw me folding the kids' clothes, and sighed like I had done something wrong. "You don't have to do that, Eleanor," she said. "I don't want the kids getting used to handouts in my own house." I felt something shift inside me that day, like a thread pulling loose. Still I kept quiet. For David. For the kids. For the sake of peace. But peace is a fragile thing. One night, I overheard them talking in the kitchen when they thought I was asleep. Madison's voice was sharp, cutting through the walls. "She treats this place like it's hers," Madison said. "Always acting like she runs things." David mumbled something I couldn't hear. And then Madison said the words that made my heart go cold. "Just because she owns it doesn't mean she owns us." That was the first time I realized the house wasn't the only thing they wanted control over. They wanted control over me. And they were about to get bolder, much bolder, until something happened that none of us could take back. Because one rainy Thursday afternoon, in my own living room, Madison finally crossed the line. But before we get to that moment, you need to know what led to it. The small humiliations, the whispers behind closed doors, the day I almost packed my bags to leave the home I built with my own 2 hands. Because what happened next would change everything. And it would all start with something as simple as a plate of cookies. The week before everything exploded, before Madison told me to stop touching her kids in my own home, I began to notice little things. Things that seemed small at first but began to feel heavier with every passing day. I was in the kitchen one evening, stirring a pot of stew, when I heard Madison on the phone. She was in the next room, her voice low but tense, like she was angry about something. "She just doesn't know when to stop," she said. "It's like she thinks this is her house or something." I froze, the wooden spoon in my hand dripping stew back into the pot. This house. The one Richard and I built from scratch. The one where my children had taken their first steps. The one where I spent countless nights praying over fevers, homework, and teenage heartbreaks. I leaned closer to the doorframe, my heart thudding in my chest. "David, you need to tell her," Madison said. "She can't keep acting like she owns everything." I didn't hear what David said in response. Maybe he mumbled, maybe he stayed silent. That was his way sometimes, silence. But Madison. She was a storm gathering strength. The next morning, I found my favorite rocking chair pushed into a corner of the living room. The kids' toys had taken its place. I didn't say anything. I just moved the chair back when no one was looking. That afternoon, she came into the kitchen while I was baking cookies for the children. "Eleanor," she said sweetly, "the kids really don't need all that sugar. It's not healthy." I turned to her, wiping my hands on my apron. "It's a treat," I said softly. "I've been baking these for them since they were old enough to chew." Her smile tightened. "Well, things are different now. I want to be sure my kids grow up the right way." My kids. Those words again. Always sharp. Always claiming. I swallowed back the anger rising in my throat. But it didn't stop there. Later that evening, I overheard her talking to David again. "She hovers over them," Madison said. "Every time they sneeze, she's there with a tissue. It's weird. Weird. That's what she thought of me rocking them to sleep when they had nightmares. Weird. That's what she thought of me kissing their little foreheads before they ran out to play. Weird. I started to feel like a stranger in my own home. The kids still ran to me when they scraped a knee or had a bad dream. They still asked me for cookies before dinner, even though Madison scolded them for it. But slowly I noticed Madison watching. Always watching. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat in the dark living room with only the clock ticking on the wall for company. I thought about packing my things. About leaving. About finding some small apartment where no one could look at me like I didn't belong. But this was my home. I wasn't going anywhere. The next day things got worse. I was sitting on the porch, mending one of the kids' jackets, when Madison came out with her arms folded tight across her chest. "Eleanor," she said sharply, "you can't keep hugging them like that every time they leave the room. It's smothering." Mothering. I stared at her, the needle frozen in my hand. "They're children," I said softly. "Children need love." She gave a little laugh, humorless and cold. "They need boundaries." Boundaries. The word stayed with me long after she walked away, because I started to wonder if this was really about boundaries, or if it was about control. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, the rainy Thursday came. The day she finally said it. The day she told me in front of my own son in my own living room to stop touching her kids. But what she said after that, that was the part that cut the deepest. Because it wasn't just about the kids anymore. It was about me. About my place in this family. About everything I had built, given, and sacrificed for. And that was the day something in me broke. The rain was falling hard that Thursday afternoon, drumming on the roof like it was keeping time for the chaos about to erupt inside my home. I had just taken the tray of cookies out of the oven when Madison walked in with her arms crossed. Her chin tilted in that way she always did when she wanted to start something. David followed behind her, quiet as usual. His hands shoved in his pockets like he was just along for the ride. The kids were in the living room laughing at some cartoon on TV. Their giggles filled the house the way sunshine used to before Madison moved in and turned everything cold. I set the cookies on the table, the smell of warm chocolate and sugar drifting through the room. Normally, the kids would come running, but Madison called out sharply before they could even get off the couch. "Stay there, kids. Mommy needs to talk to Grandma first." Her voice had that edge again, the one that sliced right through my chest. She turned to me, her eyes hard. "Eleanor," she said, "we need to set some rules." I wiped my hands on my apron. "Rules," I repeated. "Yes, about the kids. About boundaries." There it was again. That word. Boundaries. I looked over at the kids, confused. "Madison, I don't understand. They're my grandchildren. I love them. I take care of them when you're busy. What kind of rules could you possibly need for that?" Madison's lips pressed into a thin line. "You need to stop hugging them so much. Stop kissing them. Stop picking them up whenever you feel like it. They're my children. Not yours." I felt my chest tighten. The room went quiet except for the sound of rain hammering the windows. David still said nothing. The kids looked from me to their mother, confused, their little faces pale with uncertainty. "Madison," I said slowly, my voice trembling, "I've been hugging those children since the day they were born. I was there in the delivery room when the oldest came into this world. I was the one rocking them through fevers, nightmares, first day of school jitters. And you want me to stop?" Her arms folded tighter. "Yes, I want you to stop. It's smothering. It's unhealthy." Unhealthy. I stared at her like I didn't even know who she was anymore. But then she said something that cut deeper than anything before. "Maybe if you had been this involved with your own kids, David wouldn't have had such a rough childhood." Felt like a punch to the gut. The words hit me so hard I had to grip the back of the chair to stay upright. David's head snapped up at that, his eyes widening, but he still didn't say a word. My own son. Silent. I looked at him, hoping for something. For him to defend me, to tell her she was out of line, to remind her whose house she was standing in. But nothing came. The kids sat frozen on the couch, watching this unfold, their eyes wide. And that was when something inside me cracked. Because this wasn't just about hugs. This wasn't just about the kids. This was about erasing me, about pushing me out of the very home I built, one cruel comment at a time. I felt the anger rise, slow but hot, like lava breaking through stone. And for the first time in a long time I didn't hold back. "Madison," I said, my voice low but sharp enough to cut the air. "You have some nerve standing in my house telling me how to love my own grandchildren. You and David have lived here for 2 years, rent-free, eating my food, using my lights, sleeping under my roof. And now you want to tell me I can't hug the children I've raised like my own." Her face flushed, but she didn't back down. "This isn't about the house," she snapped. "This is about my kids. And if you can't respect that, maybe this living arrangement isn't working out." The words hung between us like smoke after a fire. The kids stared. David finally opened his mouth, but before he could say anything, Madison delivered the blow that changed everything. "Maybe it's time you found somewhere else to live, Eleanor." "Somewhere else?" "In the house Richard and I built. The house with my name on the deed." I stared at her, stunned, as the rain beat harder against the windows. Because right then, in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just disrespect. This was war. And Madison had no idea what I was capable of when someone tried to take what was mine. That night I didn't sleep. The rain finally stopped around midnight, but inside me the storm was only just beginning. Madison's words kept circling in my mind like vultures over something dying. "Maybe it's time you found somewhere else to live, Eleanor." I sat in the dark living room long after everyone had gone to bed, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen the only sound in the house. My hands were still trembling, but not from fear this time. From anger. I looked around at the walls Richard and I had painted together, the photographs of our children growing up, the quilt draped over the couch that my own mother had made. This was my home. The land was mine. The deed was in my name. And yet my daughter-in-law thought she could walk in here, eat my food, live rent-free for 2 years and then tell me to leave. I sat there staring at the flickering light of the street lamp outside, and somewhere deep inside me something snapped. I was done being quiet. The next morning I cooked breakfast like nothing had happened. Bacon, eggs, biscuits, fresh orange juice. Madison came into the kitchen wearing that same tight smile, the one that never reached her eyes. "Morning," she said like she hadn't humiliated me in front of my own son the day before. I nodded but didn't speak. David wandered in half asleep, mumbling something about work. The kids sat at the table, giggling over cartoons on the tablet, unaware of the storm brewing around them. I placed the plates on the table, my face calm, my voice steady. But inside I was already making plans. Because Madison thought she had power here. She thought her words carried weight. She thought David's silence meant I had no one on my side. But what she didn't know was that this house wasn't the only thing I owned. And I had kept quiet about that for a very long time. After breakfast, when Madison left for errands and David went to work, I called my lawyer. His name was Frank Thompson, a kind man in his 60s who had handled Richard's will after he passed. "Eleanor," he said warmly, "how have you been?" "I need to make some changes," I told him, my voice low but firm. "To your will." "To everything." There was a long pause on the line. "Everything?" "Yes," I said. "The house, the accounts, the land up by the lake. All of it." "All right," he said slowly. "What's going on?" I hesitated for a moment, staring out the window where the kids were chasing each other across the yard. "My son and his wife seem to have forgotten whose name is on the deed," I said finally. "And I think it's time I reminded them." He chuckled softly, but I didn't. This wasn't funny to me. "Can you come by the office tomorrow?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "First thing in the morning." I hung up and stood there for a long time, watching the wind blow through the trees. Because I wasn't just changing papers. I was changing everything. That afternoon, Madison came back from shopping with bags full of clothes and toys she didn't pay a dime for. My dime, my roof, my electricity. She dropped the bags on the couch and announced, "We're redecorating the kids' room. They need a space that feels more modern." "Modern?" I said nothing. Just smiled, that quiet smile people wear when they've already made a decision nobody knows about yet. The next day I went to see Frank. We spent hours going over documents, accounts, and titles. He asked me over and over if I was sure about everything I was signing. I was sure. Because while Madison was busy measuring curtains and talking about paint colors, I was signing the papers that would change this house, and everything else I owned, forever. When I left Frank's office, the sun was setting, painting the sky a deep red. It felt like the world itself knew something big was coming. Because the next time Madison opened her mouth to tell me to leave my own house, she was going to get the shock of her life. Madison had no idea the papers were already signed. For the next few days, she walked around my house like she owned it. Her heels clicking on the hardwood floors, her voice sharp and bossy, directing the children like she was the queen of some little kingdom. But I stayed quiet. I cooked breakfast every morning. I watered the flowers Richard and I had planted years ago. Kissed my grandkids goodnight. On the surface, nothing had changed. But inside me, everything had. I had signed the house over to someone else. Not Madison. Not David. Someone who had always been there for me when I needed help the most. Someone who checked on me after Richard passed. Who drove me to my doctor's appointments when David was too busy. Someone who treated me like a person, not a burden. And when the time came, Madison was going to learn the hard way that the woman she thought was weak had been holding the power all along. The morning it all came out started like any other. I was in the kitchen scrambling eggs when Madison came in with a stack of glossy paint samples. "Eleanor," she said briskly, "we've decided the kids need brighter walls. David and I are thinking of tearing out that old bookshelf in the living room too. It makes the place feel dated." Dated. The bookshelf Richard built with his own hands 20 years ago. I kept stirring the eggs, my face calm. "Did you ask me first?" I said softly. Madison gave a little laugh like I had told a joke. "Oh, come on. Just a house. We all live here, don't we? Just a house." The words were gasoline on a fire. Before I could respond, David walked in, rubbing the back of his neck like he didn't want to be part of this conversation. "David," Madison said sweetly, "tell your mom it's time we made this place ours." That was the moment I put the spatula down. Slowly. Only. Because this was it. The moment I had been waiting for. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, "it's not yours. Not now. Not ever." Madison blinked. "Excuse me." I turned, wiped my hands on my apron, and looked her straight in the eye. "This house isn't yours, Madison. Never will be. In fact, as of last week, it's not even David's anymore." The color drained from her face. "What are you talking about?" I walked over to the counter, picked up the folder Frank had given me, and laid the documents on the table. "This," I said, tapping the papers, "is the deed. Signed over to someone else entirely. Someone who actually gives a damn about me." David stepped forward, his eyes wide. "Mom, what did you do?" I met his gaze, years of silence and sacrifice boiling beneath my calm words. "What I should have done a long time ago." Madison snatched the papers off the table, scanning them with shaking hands. "What is this?" she demanded. Who is Margaret Thompson?" The corner of my mouth lifted just slightly. "My best friend. The one who visited me in the hospital when I broke my hip. The one who called every week after your father passed. The one who actually cares." Madison's mouth opened, but no words came out. David sank into a chair like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. "You gave the house to her." Madison finally managed to choke out. "I gave the house," I said evenly, "to the only person who has treated me like family in the last 5 years." The kids had gone quiet on the couch, watching everything with wide eyes. Madison threw the papers back on the table. "You can't do this," she shouted. "You can't just—" "Oh, I can," I cut in, my voice sharp now. "Because while you were busy planning paint colors, I was signing the deed. This house belongs to Margaret now. Not you. Not David. Not anyone who thinks they can walk in here and push me out." Madison's face flushed a deep red. "You'll regret this, Eleanor." I took a step closer, meeting her glare with one of my own. No, I said softly. The only thing I regret is letting it get this far. But what Madison didn't know was that the house wasn't the only thing I had transferred. And when she found out about the rest, it was going to tear this family apart. Madison didn't sleep that night. I could hear her pacing the hallway long after the kids were in bed, her footsteps sharp against the floorboards. David stayed in the bedroom, his voice low whenever she snapped at him. But me, I slept like a baby for the first time in weeks. Because I knew what was coming next. The house was only the beginning. 2 days later, the second blow landed. I was sitting on the porch sipping my coffee when the mail truck pulled up. The driver handed Madison a thick envelope from Frank Thompson's office. She looked at it suspiciously, then tore it open right there in the yard. I watched from the porch as her face drained of color. Because inside that envelope were the documents for the lake property, the savings accounts, and the small rental homes Richard and I had bought over the years. All of it, every single thing, was now in someone else's name. Not David's. Not Madison's. And definitely not anyone who thought they could humiliate me in my own house. Madison stormed up to the porch, waving the papers like a weapon. "What is this?" she demanded. I didn't even flinch. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said calmly. "I signed everything over. All the property, all the accounts. Everything." "To who?" she snapped. "To the people who actually care about me," I said evenly. "The ones who didn't tell me to leave my own home. The ones who never made me feel like a burden." David came outside then, his face pale. He took the papers from Madison and flipped through them, his hands trembling. "Mom, you moved everything?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I said. "While you two were busy trying to push me out, I made sure you wouldn't get a dime." Madison's mouth fell open. "You can't do this," she hissed. I finally stood, my eyes locking on hers. "I already did." The kids had come to the door by then, peeking out, sensing the tension even if they didn't understand it. Madison's voice shook with anger. "You mean to tell me you've given away everything? The house, the land, the accounts, everything?" I nodded slowly. "Everything but the memories. Those you can't take from me." David dropped the papers on the porch swing, his shoulders slumping like someone had cut the strings holding him up. "But Madison..." Oh, she wasn't done yet. She took a step closer, her voice low and venomous. "You think you've won, Eleanor. But you haven't. Because when those kids grow up, they'll know you turned their father against his own family." Something inside me snapped at that. "Family," I said sharply. "Family doesn't treat you like a stranger in your own home. Family doesn't eat your food, live under your roof, and then tell you to leave. Family doesn't humiliate you in front of your grandchildren." Madison's face flushed red, her fists clenched at her sides. "You'll regret this," she spat. "I swear you will." I took a step closer, my voice steady now, cold as the wind picking up across the yard. "No," I said softly. "The only thing I regret is raising a son too weak to stand up to a woman like you." David's head shot up, guilt flashing across his face. Madison's mouth opened like she was going to say something else, maybe something crueler than before, but then she stopped. Because just then, another car pulled into the driveway, a sleek black sedan, and out stepped Frank Thompson, holding another folder. Madison froze. "What now?" she demanded. Frank walked up the steps, handed me the folder and said, "It's done, Eleanor. All accounts have been transferred. As of today, you have no legal or financial ties to them whatsoever." Madison's face turned the color of ash. David ran a hand through his hair like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. But me. I felt lighter than I had in years. Because this wasn't just about property anymore. This was about freedom. And they didn't even know the biggest surprise was still coming. The morning after Frank handed me those final papers, the whole house felt like it was holding its breath. Madison didn't even look at me when she came into the kitchen. She poured her coffee, slammed the mug on the counter so hard some of it spilled, and barked at the kids to eat faster. David sat at the table staring into his plate like the eggs might give him answers to questions he hadn't asked out loud yet. And me. I felt a strange, quiet calm. Because I knew what was coming. Madison thought she was angry before, but she had no idea the firestorm she was about to unleash on herself. It started when she got on the phone that afternoon. She called her sister, her voice loud enough for half the street to hear. She gave away everything. Madison snapped. The house, the land, the money, everything. To strangers. I was sitting on the porch with my coffee, rocking slowly, watching the neighbors pause as they walked their dogs, pretending not to listen. But Madison didn't care about who was listening anymore. She's losing it, she told her sister. We've been living here for 2 years, and now she thinks she can just throw us out? After everything we've done for her. Everything they had done for me. I nearly laughed right there on the porch. But then Madison said something that made me go still. She's old, she muttered. Maybe it's time we looked into getting her evaluated or something. If she can't make rational decisions, maybe those papers don't even count. I felt my grip tighten on the coffee mug. So now I was crazy. Because I didn't hand my life's work over to her on a silver platter. The neighbors walking by slowed down, glancing at me, at Madison shouting into the phone, at the storm gathering on my porch. And then, like she wanted the entire neighborhood to hear, Madison turned toward me and yelled, "You're going to regret this, Eleanor. Do you hear me? You'll regret it when you're all alone in some nursing home while we're living our lives." The screen door creaked as I stood slowly, setting my coffee down with deliberate calm. The neighbors stopped pretending now. They stood on sidewalks, leaning on fences, watching. Madison's face was flushed, her voice shaking with rage. All of this could have been ours. The kid's future. David's future. And you threw it away out of spite. I walked to the edge of the porch, my voice low but carrying across the yard. "No, Madison," I said. "I gave it to people who won't use me, who won't scream at me in my own home, who won't tell me I can't hug my grandchildren like I'm some stranger off the street." She opened her mouth to respond, but I raised my voice before she could. "You think this is about the house? The money? Well, this is about respect. And you lost that the day you told me to stop touching my grandkids in the very home I raised their father in." The neighbors were whispering now. David stood frozen in the doorway, looking like he wanted to disappear. But Madison wasn't done. She stepped off the porch, her voice rising. "You can't just erase us like this. We're your family." I looked her dead in the eye. "Family doesn't treat you like a burden," I said softly. "Family doesn't take and then scream when the giving stops." She stared at me, breathing hard, her hands clenched at her sides. And then, for the first time since this began, I smiled. Because Madison didn't know about the letter Frank had mailed that morning. The one announcing the sale of the lake property. The one transferring the proceeds, every last dollar, into a trust fund for my grandchildren. Not Madison. Not David. The kids. So one day, when they were grown, they would know exactly who protected their future. Not the mother who used them. Not the father who stayed silent. But the grandmother who refused to be erased. And when Madison found out, when she realized she hadn't just lost the house but the money too, the entire neighborhood was going to hear her scream. Madison found out 2 days later. The letter arrived in the morning mail. A thick white envelope stamped with Frank Thompson's law office in bold black ink. David was the one who brought it inside, setting it on the kitchen table like it might burn his fingers. Madison tore it open before he could even sit down. I stayed on the porch, rocking slowly in my chair, sipping my coffee. I already knew what was in it. Because I was the one who told Frank to send it. Madison's eyes scanned the page, and for a moment she didn't move. Then she crumpled the letter in her fist. "You've got to be kidding me," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. David picked up the second page she'd dropped on the table. His face went pale. "Madison," he said quietly. It's a trust." She spun around, her hair whipping over her shoulder, her eyes blazing toward the porch where I sat. "You sold the lake property," she shouted. The one worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I set my coffee down, calm as still water. Yes, I said. Yesterday. Frank handled the sale. And you put all of it, she yelled, shaking the crumpled letter, into a trust fund for the kids. Not for us. Not for David and me. I met her fury with the quietest voice in the world. No, not for you. For their future. For college. For a home of their own one day. For the things you would have wasted trying to redecorate rooms that were fine the way they were. The neighbors were already gathering again, pretending to water their lawns, lingering by mailboxes. Everyone could hear her shouting. David rubbed his temples like he wished the ground would swallow him whole. You had no right, Madison snapped, her voice shrill now. You should have left that money to their parents to manage. I stood slowly, walked to the porch railing, and looked her straight in the eye. I had every right. Richard and I earned it. We built it. We saved it. And I'll be damned if I let you burn through it before those kids even turn 18. Her mouth opened, then closed again like she was searching for words strong enough to hurt me. She didn't find them. Instead, she turned on David. Are you just going to stand there? She's giving everything away. She's making sure we have nothing. David looked at me, his face pale, his voice quiet. Mom, is there anything left for us? I didn't blink. No, I said. Not a dime. Madison made a sound then, a sharp, furious cry, and flung the crumpled letter across the yard. It landed near the sidewalk where two neighbors pretended not to read it as they passed by. This is insane, she shouted. You're cutting your own son out of everything because of some stupid argument. No, I said softly. I'm cutting out the people who tried to throw me out of my own home. There's a difference. The kids had come to the doorway now, clutching each other's hands, eyes wide. And that was when I delivered the final blow. Madison, I said, my voice steady as stone. This house, this money, the land, it's all gone from your hands. But you know what? I still have the right to decide who lives here. And after the way you've treated me, after the way you've spoken to me in front of my grandchildren, I let the silence stretch, the neighbors leaning in closer without moving their feet. You and David have 1 week to find somewhere else to live. Her jaw dropped. David looked like I had slapped him. The kids gasped. And Madison. Oh, she laughed. A sharp, ugly laugh that didn't reach her eyes. You can't be serious, she said, her voice dripping with disbelief. I didn't smile. 1 week, I repeated. Then this house will be mine again. Quiet. Peaceful. The way it was before you brought your storms through my door. Madison's face twisted, the anger boiling up so hot I thought she might explode right there in the yard. And when she finally did, when the last mask came off in front of the entire neighborhood, what she said next made even David stumble back in shock. Because it wasn't just anger anymore. It was hatred. And she didn't care who heard it. Madison snapped. The moment the words left my mouth, 1 week to leave, it was like a dam burst inside her. You ungrateful old woman, she screamed, her voice carrying across the yard for every neighbor, every dog walker, every kid on a bike to hear. We took care of you. We let you be around your grandkids. And this is how you repay us. The neighbors stopped pretending not to watch now. People actually crossed the street to stand closer. The mailman leaned on his truck like this was better than TV. I didn't say a word. Because she wasn't done. You think anyone's going to remember you when you're gone? Madison shouted. You think those kids will care about some trust fund when you're just a lonely old woman with no one left? The kids flinched. David closed his eyes like he wished the ground would swallow him whole. But I stood there, calm as ever, because I had spent 76 years learning one thing. Sometimes the loudest person in the room is the weakest one there. Madison pointed a shaking finger at me. You're bitter. That's what you are. Bitter because nobody wants you around anymore. And that was when I saw it, her real fear. Because this was never about money. Not really. It was about control. She wanted the house, the land, the accounts, because as long as I held them, she couldn't push me out. And she hated that I had taken that power away from her. I finally spoke, my voice steady enough to cut through her rage. "No, Madison," I said softly. "I'm not bitter. I'm free." She laughed, sharp and ugly. "Free? You've got nothing left now. You gave it all away." I took a step forward. "I gave it to people who will honor it. Who won't turn my home into a battlefield. Who won't make my grandchildren grow up hearing their grandmother talk to like trash." David opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, maybe to defend me, maybe to defend her, but then Madison spun on him. "And you," she snapped, jabbing her finger at him. "Are you just going to let her do this? Are you just going to let your own mother ruin our lives?" David looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time in years I saw the boy I raised, not the silent man who let his wife run over everyone. "Madison," he said quietly, "this is her house. Or life. Maybe we—" "Oh, shut up," she screamed, cutting him off. Gasps rippled through the neighbors. And that was it. The final mask slipped. Because Madison didn't care about the kids watching from the porch. She didn't care about the neighbors whispering across the yard. She didn't care about David shrinking into himself like a man who had finally seen what he married. She only cared that she had lost. I stepped closer, my voice low but carrying through the stunned silence. "1 week," I said again. "Then I want you out." Madison's face twisted with rage, but before she could speak, I delivered the last thing she never saw coming. "And when you go," I said softly, "you'll go knowing those kids will grow up in this house with everything they need: love, security, and a future. Because this house, this land, this money, it all belongs to them now. Not you. Not David. Them." She froze. The neighbors gasped again. Because now everyone understood. Madison hadn't just lost the house. She had lost the legacy she thought she could control. The kids ran to me then, wrapping their little arms around my waist, and for the first time in weeks, I felt peace settle over my chest like sunlight breaking through clouds. Madison stood there shaking, her face pale with fury, her mouth opening and closing but no words coming out. Because there was nothing left to say. She had tried to erase me. But in the end I had erased her. And when she finally left a week later, suitcases slammed into the car, neighbors watching from their porches, David silent in the driver's seat. I stood on the porch holding my grandchildren's hands, knowing the house was ours again, peaceful. And as the car disappeared down the street, I whispered to those kids the one thing I wanted them to carry into their future. Never let anyone tell you that you don't belong where love built you. Because that was the real legacy. Not the house. Not the money. But the lesson. That no one, no matter how loud, how cruel, or how entitled, can take away what you've built with love and sacrifice. If this story touched your heart, reminded you of the power of standing your ground, and showed you that self-respect is worth more than gold, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share your own story because your voice matters too.